My name is Zainab. I am 28 years old, and on October 30th, 2016, I was scheduled to die. I was born a Saudi princess, raised in wealth most people can't imagine. I lived in a palace with over 200 rooms, surrounded by gold, marble floors, and servants who bowed when I walked past. From the outside, my life looked perfect, powerful, untouchable. But inside those palace walls, I was a prisoner. I was sentenced to death for one reason. I refused to cover my head. 3 days before my execution, something happened that changed everything. This is a story of how Jesus Christ saved my life when no one else could. The palace where I grew up was breathtaking. The floors were polished marble that stayed cold no matter how hot the desert sun became. Massive chandeliers hung from ceilings, so high they felt closer to heaven than earth. Fountains filled the courtyards with the sound of flowing water, and the walls were decorated with gold calligraphy from the Quran. But no matter how beautiful it was, I felt trapped in every single room. Every morning I woke up in silk sheets that cost more than many people's homes. Servants dressed me, fed me, and followed every command. But the weight of expectation was heavier than any blanket. From the time I was 5 years old, I was taught my purpose. Obey. Be silent. Disappear behind fabric. My grandmother would sit me down in the garden courtyard, surrounded by flowers and fountains, and explain my destiny. Your voice must never be heard by men outside your family. Your face must never be seen. Your thoughts must never go beyond what Allah has allowed. I believed her. I believed this was the only way to please God. By the age of 12, I had memorized the entire Quran. Religious leaders praised me. My father would smile proudly as I recited verses in perfect Arabic. She will be a light for Muslim women, they said. At the time, it felt like love. Later, I realized it was the sound of a cage locking around my soul. My life was scheduled down to the minute. 5 prayers a day. Exact words. Exact movements. Before dawn, I washed myself and knelt on an ornate prayer rug that had been in our family for generations. I recited the same prayers again and again. They said prayer would bring peace, but instead, it felt mechanical. I spoke the words, moved my body, bowed my head, but afterward I felt empty. I told myself doubt was sin. I buried my questions deep inside my heart. The palace walls were covered with verses about submission and obedience. Everywhere I turned, I was reminded to stay in my place. At night, alone in my luxurious room, surrounded by jewelry and fabrics worth millions, I felt like I was suffocating. Something inside me whispered, "Why do you feel so empty if this is the truth?" I watched the women in my family slowly disappear. My mother had once been full of life. I knew it from old photographs hidden in her jewelry box. But year after year, her spirit faded. Her laughter disappeared. By the time I was 20, she spoke only when spoken to. It was like watching a flower slowly die. I will never forget the day my 16-year-old sister laughed in public. We were at a charity event. A child receiving aid made a funny face, and my sister laughed, pure, joyful laughter. Our uncle's face turned dark. That night, he beat her with a leather strap. The fear in her eyes never left. That moment burned something into my soul. When foreign diplomats visited, I saw women who looked alive. They spoke freely. They laughed without fear. They looked people in the eye. One American diplomat's wife spoke to me privately. She looked straight at me and said something I could never forget. God gave you gifts for a reason. He didn't create you to be silent. She spoke about Jesus, about freedom, about prayer as a conversation, not a ritual. Her words scared me, but they also awakened something inside me. On October 15th, 2016, I woke up unable to breathe. Not physically, spiritually. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone whose dreams had been buried alive. That morning, I made a decision. I walked into the royal courtyard without my hijab. The sun touched my face for the first time in 28 years. Gasps filled the air. Servants screamed. Guards turned away. My father arrived, his face changing from shock to rage to grief. "Daughter," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "You've signed your death sentence." They dragged me before the religious court. The room was dark and heavy with judgment. Verses about obedience covered the walls. The charges were read: apostasy, defiance, corruption, shame. The sentence: death by beheading, public execution. 7 days. I was thrown into a tiny stone cell. No bed, no comfort, just cold walls and silence. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I prayed to Allah thousands of times. I begged. I promised. I repented. Nothing. The silence was terrifying. The God I had served my whole life felt absent. 3 days before my execution, I remembered the diplomat's wife. Her words echoed in my mind. That night, I whispered words I never thought I'd say. "Jesus, if you're real, please help me." I told him everything. My fear, my emptiness, my desperation. And then something happened. Warmth filled the room. Not physical warmth, peace. I felt held, loved, safe. For the first time in my life, I knew God was real, and He was listening. I slept peacefully. On the morning of my execution, the guards came. But instead of chains, they brought papers. International pressure. Embassies. Human rights organizations. Impossible timing. My sentence was overturned. I was exiled instead of executed. 48 hours to leave Saudi Arabia forever. I fled the country under protection. I lost everything. Family, title, wealth. But I gained something greater. On Christmas Day, 2016, I was baptized. I was free. I live in a small apartment. I work with refugees. I help women escape oppression. I receive death threats. But I have peace. I lost an earthly kingdom. But I gained the kingdom of heaven. If Jesus can save a Saudi princess on death row, He can save anyone. No one is beyond His reach.